Everyone deserves fair treatment, no matter their race or background. Always think carefully before judging others. The bustling terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport exuded an energy that was both frenetic and clinical. In a sleek, modern lounge reserved for pilots and senior airline personnel, the ambient hum of multiple televisions flickered against the walls, their muted sounds interwoven with the occasional murmur of corporate chatter. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee, emanating from carefully arranged thermoses on polished tables, mingled with the crisp scent of new leather and the faint tang of airport security. Amid this atmosphere of controlled efficiency, a young figure entered quietly, a 16-year-old boy named Jayden Reid. Dressed in a faded baseball cap, a slightly oversized hoodie, and carrying a worn backpack slung unassumingly over one shoulder, Jayden appeared almost invisible as he pushed open the heavy glass door leading to the pilot's lounge. His eyes, dark and alert, scanned the room with a singular focus. He needed to find an available electrical outlet to charge his phone before his long flight. There was an air of quiet determination about him, a stark contrast to the polished, authoritative air that permeated the space. As he stepped inside, he tried to blend into the backdrop of uniformed pilots and airline staff, moving slowly along the row of cushioned chairs. However, his presence disrupted the carefully curated order of the lounge. Captain Rachel Blake, a seasoned commercial airline pilot with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol, was seated at a central table reviewing a flight schedule on her tablet. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, momentarily flickered toward Jayden as he passed by. Within seconds, the expression on her face shifted from routine disinterest to one of disdain. Without uttering a word or offering any explanation, she reached for her radio and, in a clipped tone, announced, "We have a suspicious individual in the pilot's lounge. Request immediate assistance at gate B12. Her voice, measured and uncaring, cut through the gentle din of the lounge like a knife. The reaction was instantaneous. The previously relaxed chatter died down as alarm spread among the pilots and staff. Jayden, oblivious at first to her pointed remark, was in the midst of scanning the row of outlets by a side table when two uniformed police officers briskly entered the lounge. Their presence was unmistakable. Dark uniforms, stern expressions, and the unmistakable click of handcuffs were all part of the sudden intrusion into what had been an otherwise controlled environment. Around him, the atmosphere turned icy. The once friendly glow of the televisions now seemed harsh and interrogative, spotlighting every nervous movement. Conversations of pilots and technicians halted mid-sentence, and the air was suddenly thick with tension. Eyes from nearby tables darted in Jayden's direction, some filled with exasperation, others with curiosity and even a hint of fear. A nearby officer scanned the crowd, his gaze tightening on Jayden as if verifying his identity, while another quietly whispered directions to his partner. Meanwhile, in another corner of the lounge, a couple of veteran pilots exchanged disapproving looks, their faces set in thinly veiled judgment. The murmured commentary of the crowd grew louder, snatches of whispered criticism filling the space as patrons speculated on the newcomer's motives. The juxtaposition of the rich aroma of coffee and the sharp sting of suspicion created a dissonance that was almost tangible. Jayden's heart pounded steadily in his chest as he clutched the strap of his backpack tighter. He could feel every eye in the room on him as the officers advanced, stepping forward with purpose. In that charged, cinematic moment, between the hum of the lounge's televisions and the distant echo of Captain Blake's call over the radio, Jayden realized that he was now deeply entangled in a misunderstanding that could upend his plans, and perhaps his life. With the police officers stopping right beside him, their voices low and urgent, the scene reached a crescendo. The tension was nearly unbearable as Jayden prepared to speak, to explain that he was only there to charge his phone and wait for his father. But before he could utter a word, his world tilted into chaos. The officers' determined strides toward him, the relentless stares from around the room, and the bland yet piercing announcement over the radio promised that his fate in that moment rested on a precipice. The tense silence in the lounge was broken by the low, authoritative voices of the police officers as they approached Jayden Reid. Startled and visibly anxious, Jayden raised his hands slightly in a gesture of meek compliance, his eyes wide with uncertain fear. Sensing his distress, one of the officers spoke sharply. "Sir, we need you to come with us. What are you doing here?" Jayden's mind raced. He had been merely trying to locate a spare outlet along the wall, his only goal to charge his phone before boarding his flight. With as much calm as he could muster, he began. I'm just here to charge my phone. I've got an FAA pass that says I'm allowed in this area because I'm waiting for my father." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the words carried a quiet determination. Captain Rachel Blake, still watching from a raised seat near a row of pilot desks, sneered audibly. "That's a convenient excuse," she mocked sharply into her headset. "A suspicious kid wandering about as if he's meant to be in the pilot's lounge." Her tone dripped with contempt, and even the officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to accept her assertion without verification. Noticing the escalating tension, one officer demanded, "Sir, show us your FAA pass immediately." With trembling fingers, Jayden slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out a neatly folded document marked with the official FAA seal. The pass, though modest in appearance, bore all the requisite identification details verifying his clearance. The officer examined it with a furrowed brow, its legitimacy undeniable. Yet, Captain Blake's disapproving scoff echoed in the background, reinforcing an atmosphere thick with prejudice. At that precise moment, the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the lounge swung open, and a tall, authoritative figure strode inside. It was Edward Reid, Jayden's father, whose presence radiated power and command. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit, his posture straight and gaze unyielding, Edward's arrival halted the murmurs and uncertain glances throughout the lounge. His piercing eyes locked onto Captain Blake as he approached briskly. "What is the meaning of this?" Edward demanded, his voice firm and resonant as he turned toward the commanding officer at the scene. "I am Edward Reid, administrator at the FAA, and this young man is my son." His tone left no room for argument, and the tension shifted palpably. Captain Blake's confident expression faltered for a split second as Edward's authority radiated through the room. Still, she attempted to recover with a sneer. "Sir, we were simply following protocol for a suspicious individual. I'm not proposing any wrongdoing, just adhering to security measures." But Edward's eyes, cold and unwavering, cut through her feigned concern. "Did you really call the police on my son based solely on his appearance, without even asking him any questions?" Edward asked, clearly incensed by the injustice unfolding before him. His voice, raised just enough to carry across the now silent lounge, was laced with both anger and disappointment. The officers shifted uncomfortably, caught between following orders and recognizing the error. Jayden, now standing a few steps behind his father, felt a mix of relief and lingering apprehension as Edward calmly retrieved the FAA pass from him. The atmosphere was electric, the gentle hum of television screens and low murmurs of passengers dimming in the presence of his father's authoritative aura. A few onlookers began simultaneously recording the unfolding scene on their smartphones, a tacit promise that this incident, whether revised or not, would soon be shared far beyond these walls. Edward continued, "This is not a security threat. This is a case of clear bias. My son was merely waiting for me in an authorized area. I demand that you immediately cease any further action against him, and I want a full report on how this misunderstanding occurred." His tone brooked no dissent. Captain Blake opened her mouth to retort, but before she could speak, an officer stepped forward and said, "Sir, we'll suspend further action until we confirm the details." A murmur of relief passed among the gathered crowd, though tension still clung like a heavy fog. With the immediate threat of police intervention dissipating, the room's focus shifted. Edward's imposing presence, coupled with the irrefutable FAA pass clutched in Jayden's hand, had halted any further physical confrontation. However, the charged atmosphere remained. Whispers of disbelief and murmurs of disapproval still roiled among the pilots and lounge staff. All eyes were now on Captain Blake, whose earlier certainty was visibly shaken by Edward Reid's intervention. In that moment, the seeds of an unfolding confrontation had been sown. The incident had escalated from a simple misunderstanding into a dramatic showdown, exposing the undercurrents of prejudice and the abuse of authority in a prestigious environment. As tension swirled around them, the fate of Jayden and the integrity of the process hung in the balance. The tense moment lingered in the air as Edward Reid, still standing resolutely in the center of the pilot's lounge, stepped forward with quiet authority. With a measured tone that cut through the murmurs, he declared, "I am Edward Reid, administrator at the FAA, and as I already mentioned, this young man is my son, Jayden Reid." His deep voice carried an unmistakable weight, silencing the remaining whispers and forcing every onlooker to take note. Edward's eyes swept over the room, settling first on the uniformed officers who had hesitated at his firm tone, then on Captain Rachel Blake, whose confident facade now trembled slightly under the glare of an authoritative parenting. In one smooth motion, Edward reached into his jacket pocket and produced Jayden's FAA pass. The document, neatly folded and embossed with the official seal, was an indelible proof of Jayden's legitimate presence in the lounge. "Here is Jayden's pass," Edward said, holding it up for all to see. "It verifies that my son is authorized to be here, waiting for me." The pass, with its crisp lettering and official stamp, left little doubt regarding his claim. The officers scrutinized the document for a moment, then nodded mutely, acknowledging its legitimacy. Captain Blake's eyes flickered with irritation as she adjusted the strap of her flight uniform, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is highly irregular," she muttered under her breath, though her tone now lacked its earlier venom. Her voice, transmitted over the radio in a soft reprimand, contrasted sharply with Edward's steady, commanding presence. As the FAA pass was confirmed, Edward's gaze fell on Jayden. "Son, are you all right?" he asked softly, eyes warm with concern despite the harsh fluorescent lighting of the lounge. Jayden, though visibly shaken, managed a nod. He clutched his backpack tighter as if to anchor himself amidst the storm of misunderstanding. Edward's next words, delivered with quiet determination, sent a ripple through the room. "It appears we have an issue of misjudged appearance and preconceived notions here," he said, his tone imbued with both disappointment and resolve. "I am not one to tolerate bias, especially in an environment that upholds the values of fairness and respect." His words resonated deeply with everyone listening, from the skeptical officers to the silent group of pilots seated at nearby tables. Meanwhile, in the background, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted subtly. The gentle, persistent hum of televisions and the soft clinking of coffee cups seemed to pale in comparison to the escalating gravity of the situation. Over in a corner, a couple of passengers began to record the unfolding drama with their smartphones, their lenses capturing every deliberate gesture and every measured word from Edward. The recording was destined to become crucial evidence of the incident's mismanagement. Edward took another step forward and, with a pointed look in his eyes, addressed Captain Blake directly. "Captain Blake, I must ask, did you really feel it necessary to call the police on my son simply based on his appearance? We are here to ensure safety, not to perpetuate discriminatory assumptions." His voice, dignified yet sharply critical, cut through the tension like a scalpel. For a moment, silence reigned, punctuated by the soft buzz of a phone notification and the quiet, uncertain shuffling of feet. Captain Blake's usual assured composure wavered visibly as Edward continued. "Someone in this lounge has allowed prejudice to override protocol, and that is unacceptable. I expect a full report on this incident from your office, detailing every step that led to this misunderstanding." As Edward's words reverberated throughout the space, his authoritative tone served as both a shield for his son and a challenge to those who clung to biased protocols. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, while Captain Blake's eyes betrayed a momentary uncertainty. Even the ambient hum of the lounge, once a backdrop to mundane routine, seemed to carry a charge of anticipation. Just then, a faint beep from a nearby security camera caught everyone's attention. Eyes shifted toward one of the monitors mounted discreetly on the wall, which had, until now, been displaying routine footage of pilots and crew in relative quiet. The monitor's display, however, captured a short clip from earlier that morning. A clip showing Captain Blake's brusque manner, her dismissive tone as she barked orders and sneered at Jayden. The camera recording, taken without anyone's initial awareness, now served as a potent reminder of the incident's unjust nature. But before anyone could discuss the clip further, Edward raised his hand to restore order. "We will review all the evidence calmly and objectively," he declared. "Let it be clear that prejudgment based on appearance has no place here." His words set the stage for the next moment of reckoning. A moment when the unvarnished truth, as captured on camera, would soon cast an even harsher light on the events of that day. As tension mounted and the room braced for what was coming next, the charged atmosphere in the lounge promised that no detail would be left unexamined. The truth, it seemed, was gathering in the shadows of the screen, waiting for its moment to shatter the remnants of bias. The tension in the lounge escalated further as Jayden Reid, his authoritative presence unmistakable, reached into his briefcase and produced two critical pieces of evidence. With a steady hand, he pulled out his tablet and played a video clip recorded by one of the crew members, a candid shot taken earlier that morning, capturing Captain Rachel Blake's brusque and condescending demeanor as she brusquely ordered security to apprehend Jayden. The clip showed her sharp tone, a dismissive sneer, and even a brief moment where her voice carried derogatory phrases that underscored her bias. The video, displayed on the large screen mounted on the wall, rippled through the crowd, drawing hushed gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Not willing to stop there, Edward then produced an official letter printed on FAA letterhead. The letter, dated just a few days earlier, confirmed his position and outlined directives for proper protocol with regard to access to secured areas. It explicitly stated that any unauthorized action based solely on appearance and prejudice was unacceptable, and that such actions would be subject to immediate administrative review. Edward's precise articulation left little doubt as to the gravity of the situation. "Captain Blake," Edward said, his deep, commanding voice reverberating in the room, "I am shocked not only at the manner in which my son was treated but also at the blatant disregard for proper protocol. Your actions in calling the police without verifying my son's status, and doing so with such overt prejudice, have not gone unnoticed." He paused as he pointed towards the large display. "This video clearly documents your conduct, and this letter confirms that my son was fully authorized to be in this lounge." An uneasy silence fell over the room as every eye turned to Captain Blake. The once assertive pilot's confident gaze now wavered under the weight of the evidence and Edward's unyielding tone. The crowd of pilots and lounge personnel, now recording the unfolding drama on their smartphones, added to the cacophony of digital recording sounds, a modern chorus bearing witness to the moment. With the documentary evidence laid bare, Edward issued his next command. "In light of this shocking breach of protocol and the evident discriminatory conduct exhibited tonight, I hereby order that Captain Blake's commercial pilot license be immediately suspended pending a full investigation." His words rippled through the lounge like a clarion call for accountability. At that, murmurs of approval arose from several corners of the room. The officers who had entered earlier exchanged uneasy glances, and even some of the previously silent bystanders now looked on with expressions of hardened resolve. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to slow, the seriousness of Edward's order and the undeniable evidence converging to upend the night's events. Captain Blake, now visibly unsettled, shifted in her seat. The usual confidence in her eyes was replaced by a dawning realization of the gravity of her error. Her face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and regret. Feeling the mounting pressure, she hesitated, and then, through a voice that bordered on a trembling whisper, she finally spoke. I'm sorry," she stammered, addressing both Edward and, implicitly, the assembled crowd. There was a pause, as if the room itself was digesting the unexpected apology. The soft click of a gavel by Judge Davis briefly interrupted the silence, while several bystanders quickly captured every moment on their devices. In that charged instance, the balance of authority had shifted irreversibly. Edward's stern expression softened slightly, though his voice remained resolute. "An apology is only the first step. Let this serve as a reminder that fairness and proper protocol must always prevail, especially in environments as critical as our aviation corridors. His words, punctuated by the quiet symphony of tapping fingers and subdued murmurs, cemented the moment as one of uncompromised justice. As the scene unfolded, the collective mood in the lounge shifted. What had begun as a baseless act of prejudice was now exposed to the light of accountability. The evidence, audio, and official in tone, delivered a decisive blow to the disparaging assumptions that had governed the encounter. The camera lenses caught every nuance of Captain Blake's contrite expression and the silent nods of approval from the onlookers, ensuring this moment would not be forgotten. As the storm of evidence and protest reached its peak, the charged atmosphere in the lounge began to shift. Following Captain Blake's trembling apology in the previous segment, the tension in the room slowly ebbed. The loud murmurs of disapproval and disbelief gave way to a cautious optimism among those present. Captain Rachel Blake, now visibly disarmed and clearly racked with remorse, attempted to regain some control. In a tentative, almost whispered tone over the radio, she said, "This is Captain Blake. I apologize for my actions today." Her voice, lacking its usual authoritative snap, carried a note of genuine regret. The intercom crackled as her apology was repeated for those still listening, and a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the lounge. The uniformed officers, who had initially stormed in with rigid determination, now exchanged reluctant glances. Their posture softened as they recognized the weight of the evidence that Edward Reid had presented. With minimal ceremony, one of the officers said, "Sir, we'll stand down for now. Please, ensure that all further procedures follow the proper chain of command." Their decision to withdraw was communicated in low, professional tones, as they stepped back and allowed the scene to settle. Meanwhile, the cameras and smartphones in the room captured every moment. Within minutes of the confrontation on the lounge's security footage, snippets of the entire incident, Captain Blake's derisive call, Edward Reid's authoritative intervention, and the striking evidence of discrimination, began to circulate on social media platforms. The video clips, edited for dramatic effect by quick-thinking eyewitnesses, spread like wildfire. Hashtags such as #DallasDebacle and #StandWithJayden flooded Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, drawing widespread attention from both aviation professionals and the general public alike. In one corner of the lounge, a pilot quietly remarked to a colleague, "I never expected to see this on my shift. It's like the whole system just cracked open." Their hushed discussions were intermingled with the buzz of incoming messages, as news outlets began providing live updates on the incident. The viral video captured not only the dramatic intervention of Edward Reid and the unexpected softness in Captain Blake's apology, but also the poised, dignified manner in which 16-year-old Jayden handled the entire ordeal. In that moment, Jayden's expression, equal parts relief and quiet defiance, became emblematic for many watching. As the video continued to gain traction online, a few senior pilots in the lounge exchanged knowing glances. One of them commented softly, "It's incredible. Today, justice wasn't just about following the rules. It was about recognizing and righting a wrong." Their words echoed in a murmur that gradually spread throughout the room. Even some of the earlier critical onlookers seemed to reassess their initial judgments, their eyes reflecting a mix of admiration and introspection. Amid the shifting atmosphere, Edward Reid stood by his son, his presence a steady reassurance. "Thank you for standing by my side," he said, patting Jayden on the shoulder, his tone both paternal and firm. Jayden managed a small nod, still absorbing the chaotic cascade of events that had just transpired. Captain Blake's apology, though earnest, carried the weight of accountability that would undoubtedly follow. A few murmurs in the room hinted at further repercussions, as it became clear that her actions had led to more than an isolated mistake. They had ignited calls for a formal review of airline policies and procedures regarding unauthorized interference. The possibility of disciplinary measures, including the suspension of her license as Edward had already ordered, cast a long shadow over the aftermath of the incident. In the midst of all this, the booth of a nearby news reporter captured a brief, impassioned interview with one of the officers as he prepared to leave. We're here to ensure safety, but today's events remind us that assumptions should never override protocols, he stated soberly, adding that accountability had finally been met with transparency. The energy in the lounge now felt different. It was no longer a scene of tension and confrontation, but a transformative moment where every recorded gesture and every spoken word contributed to a larger narrative of change. The viral video had already begun to change perceptions, and within hours, the excitement over the incident had spread to online forums, leading to impassioned debates about discrimination, authority, and the importance of due process. As the officers retreated from the immediate area and the crowd's murmurs shifted to excited chatter, it was evident that the incident had broader ramifications than anyone had anticipated. The campus of airline professionals and pilots, once so guarded and insular, was now buzzing with a renewed sense of the need for fairness and accountability. In that charged moment, the scene in the pilot's lounge was set to be a turning point, a moment that would be dissected in countless news segments, social media posts, and perhaps even in future training sessions for airline security. The legacy of the day would linger, a reminder that prejudice, when confronted with undeniable proof and the steady resolve of rightful authority, could falter. The following week, the incident at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport reverberated far beyond the pilot's lounge. An official announcement from the FAA confirmed that a formal investigation into the actions of Captain Rachel Blake was underway. The agency stated that any deviation from proper protocol, especially when fueled by personal bias, would not be tolerated in any corner of the aviation system. In a quiet conference room at the FAA headquarters, Jayden Reid, now seated at a polished table alongside his legal team, reviewed the burgeoning reports from the investigation. His face, usually steely and resolute, softened as he exchanged reflections with his son, Jayden Reid, who sat beside him. The tension of that fateful day still lingered, and as they discussed the implications, Edward's tone took on a paternal warmth mixed with a sober reminder of the cost of prejudice. "Jayden," Edward said slowly, "today was not just about a misunderstanding. It was a clear signal that bias still runs rampant, even in environments we expect to be governed by strict regulations and order." He paused, his eyes earnest. "I hope you learned something from this. Always be true to yourself, and never let anyone's narrow view of you define your worth." Jayden, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of an FAA-issued pen, nodded silently. His experience, though harrowing, had instilled in him a quiet resolve. "I know, Dad," he murmured. "I always believed that if I kept my head down, nothing would happen. But today showed me that sometimes you have to stand up, even if it's just to wait for you to be understood." Meanwhile, campus chatter and online debates exploded. The viral video of the incident, capturing every tense moment from Captain Blake's initial call to the dramatic arrival of Jayden Reid, sparked heated discussions about discrimination, authority, and fairness in aviation work environments. Public sentiment swayed rapidly. Seasoned pilots, union leaders, and civil rights activists rallied together, demanding accountability. Hashtags such as #FairFlight, #NoToBias, and #StandWithJayden adorned social media platforms, and news outlets broadcast panels discussing the incident as a case study in systemic prejudice. Within the FAA, the investigation intensified. An internal review panel was formed, and detailed examinations of the security camera footage, radio transcripts, and eyewitness testimony commenced. In a memo circulated among FAA leadership, officials stated unequivocally, "Any actions motivated by discriminatory bias are unacceptable. We will hold responsible parties accountable in accordance with our strict protocols." The memo, soon leaked online, galvanized further support from industry insiders and the wider public. Back at Dallas Airport, Captain Blake was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. In a rare moment of vulnerability during a disciplinary hearing, she admitted, "I acted on a hasty judgment." However, her apology did little to quell the public outrage, as many viewed it as an inadequate response to a deeply ingrained issue. On a crisp, clear afternoon at an impromptu press conference near the terminal, Jayden Reid addressed a gathering of reporters. "What happened to my son today was a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that prejudice can lead to terrible errors in judgment, he declared. This isn't just about one incident. It's about ensuring that every person, regardless of their background or how they look, is treated with the respect and fairness they deserve. The press conference was broadcast live, and as Edward spoke, Jayden stood quietly by his side, his presence a testament to the strength born of personal hardship. The report immediately sparked a movement. Organizations dedicated to promoting diversity in STEM and aviation industries rallied, planning workshops and training sessions to help combat implicit bias among professionals. In the days that followed, opinion pieces and editorials proliferated, celebrating Jayden's dignity and calling for sweeping reforms. A poignant article in a major newspaper read, "When the system falters, the quiet courage of a young man reminds us that change is possible. Prejudice must not dictate our judgments, and every individual deserves the benefit of unbiased scrutiny." Edward and Jayden, reflecting on the sudden storm of attention, shared a quiet moment in a small, booked lounge at the airport. "I just hope this leads to more than temporary headlines," Edward whispered, his eyes distant yet determined. "We must all stand up against discrimination, whether in a classroom, a courtroom, or an airport lounge." Jayden's nod was the silent echo of his resolve, a commitment to never again be silenced by biases based solely on appearances. As FAA officials continued to scrutinize Captain Blake's conduct, the incident became a catalyst for change. The investigation promised not only repercussions for those directly involved, but also ushered in discussions about stronger, more consistent protocols to prevent discriminatory practices. The story of that tense day in Dallas evolved into a broader movement, a rallying cry for fairness and an enduring symbol of how courage and evidence can overturn prejudice. What do you think is the most important lesson from Jayden's experience in the Dallas airport lounge? Have you ever witnessed or experienced an incident where standing up against bias made all the difference? Write your opinion in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. I hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new and equally exciting stories. See you in the next video.